Imagine boarding a flight and realizing within moments that you are not just a passenger, you are prey. Before the engines even hum, before the champagne is poured, a single glance has already painted you as an intruder in a world that insists you don't belong. The cabin lights are dim, but her eyes are sharp, cutting into your skin like razors. She doesn't need to raise her voice. She doesn't need to curse. All she has to do is let her lips curl into that practiced, poisonous smile and whisper the most dangerous words in the English language. I don't feel safe. And suddenly, every ear leans closer. Every eye flicks toward you. In that instant, you're no longer a man in a suit. You're a suspect, a threat, a problem that needs to be removed. This is how it begins. Not with shackles, not with sirens, with a whisper designed to bury you alive before you even have the chance to speak. She thought her privilege was invisible armor, that a lifetime of moving through velvet ropes and polished corridors gave her the right to dictate who was allowed to breathe the same air. She sat rigid in her first-class seat, clutching her designer bag like a weapon, already convinced that her comfort was worth more than your dignity. She believed the world would rally to her side, that a uniformed attendant would lean down, nod gravely, and say, "Don't worry, ma'am, we'll take care of this." She believed the crowd would sigh in relief as you were quietly escorted out, another problem neatly solved. But what she didn't know, what she could not even imagine, was that the man she had targeted wasn't just another black passenger she could erase with a complaint. He carried something in his jacket that could shatter her illusion in a single heartbeat, something far more powerful than her accusation. And when the time came, when her words swelled into poison and threatened to stain the entire cabin, he would reach into that pocket with unshakable calm, flip open the leather case, and let the truth gleam under the fluorescent lights. A gold badge, cold and undeniable, 3 letters that froze her blood where she sat. FBI. But we are not there yet. First, you need to understand the storm that brewed before the badge appeared, because the badge was not the beginning. It was the ending to a story written in centuries of fear, silence, and entitlement, and tonight you are going to see every chapter unfold. She walked onto the plane like she owned it. Patricia Langford, 62 years old, a woman who had mastered the art of being untouchable. The heels clicked against the jet bridge. Her polished nails clutched a boarding pass that guaranteed her access to a world she believed was hers alone. First class wasn't just a ticket for her. It was an identity, a birthright carved into her bones. She glided down the narrow aisle, eyes already scanning the faces of those seated, searching for her reflection in their nods of recognition. And then, her stride faltered. Because there he was, Daniel Stokes. Dark skin, sharp suit, posture straight as if sculpted from stone. He wasn't slouched, wasn't fumbling, wasn't pretending. He belonged as much as she did, maybe more. And yet, in her eyes, his presence was an insult. Her chest tightened as though his very existence in that seat was an intrusion into a sacred space. She set her bag down harder than necessary, the thud sharp enough to draw a few eyes. Daniel didn't flinch. His fingers tapped steadily on the keyboard of his laptop, his gaze fixed, the glow of the screen reflecting against the sharp edges of his face. He was silent, composed, unbothered. That silence infuriated her more than anything. To Patricia, silence from a black man in first class wasn't dignity, it was defiance. So she leaned closer, voice dripping in artificial polish. "Ines. Excuse me, are you sure you're in the right seat?" Her words weren't a question, they were a test. A probe to see if he would shrink, apologize, offer some reassurance that no, of course he wouldn't dare presume too much. But Daniel didn't even lift his eyes. Yes, a single syllable, cold, final. That one word shattered her script, because in her version he was supposed to stumble, to justify himself, to prove that he belonged. Instead, he gave her nothing, no apology, no nervous laugh, just truth. And that truth cut her deeper than an insult ever could. Her lips pressed tight, her fingers clenched against the armrest. She waved down the flight attendant, her voice low but urgent. Already she was recalibrating, shifting strategies. The first attempt had failed, but she wasn't done. No, Patricia was the type who had been taught her entire life that the rules bend if you push hard enough, and she was about to push. The call button chimed softly above her head, but the sound was sharp enough to slice through the cabin's quiet. The lead flight attendant, Emily Jacobs, appeared with that polished smile that airlines train into their staff. Professional, warm, but neutral. She leaned slightly, her posture composed. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Patricia's laugh was soft, rehearsed. A laugh designed to signal to anyone listening that she wasn't a villain, merely a woman caught in an awkward mistake. "I think there's been a little mix-up. I believe this gentleman may be in the wrong seat." Her words carried the weight of certainty, as though she were doing Emily a favor by pointing it out. Emily's eyes flicked to Daniel. He paused his typing, finally glancing up. His gaze was steady, unreadable, the kind of look that reveals nothing and yet makes you feel exposed. Emily scanned her tablet, the manifest glowing faint blue in her hands. A few seconds later, her verdict was simple. No mistake. Mr. Stokes is exactly where he belongs. Your ticket is 2A, his is 2B. The smile on Patricia's face faltered, just for a fraction of a second, before she forced it back, into place. "Oh, well, how odd. I just assumed." She trailed off, letting the unfinished sentence drip with insinuation. Emily's polite tone cut her short. "Everything looks correct, ma'am." Around them, a few passengers tilted their heads slightly, pretending not to watch but listening closely. Patricia could feel it, the air tightening, eyes grazing her skin. She wasn't used to that kind of scrutiny. Usually people aligned with her, nodded along, made her discomfort their mission. But here, she could sense the cracks forming. Her chest rose with a sharp inhale. She wasn't going to let this go. She crossed her arms, sat stiffly, and waited for Emily to move away before pressing the button again. The chime rang out once more, louder this time in the silence of her mind. Emily reappeared, patience beginning to thin. "Yes, ma'am?" Patricia lowered her voice, tilting her head toward Daniel like his presence was a dirty secret. "I'd like to request a seat change." Emily blinked. "Is there an issue with the seat itself?" Patricia hesitated just long enough to sharpen her meaning. "No, I just don't feel comfortable sitting here." And with those words, the first-class cabin shifted. Because uncomfortable wasn't just about space, it was code. It was accusation wrapped in silk, and she knew exactly how much damage those words could cause. Emily's fingers tapped across her tablet, scanning the manifest again. She shook her head politely. "I'm afraid we're at full capacity in first class tonight, ma'am. There aren't any available seats." Patricia's lips twitched, irritation bubbling under her skin. Her whole life, doors had opened when she pushed. There was always an exception for people like her. But here she was hitting a wall, and that wall had a dark face and an unshakable calm. Emily offered, "I could check in economy." Patricia's face flushed hot. "Economy?" The word spat out of her like venom. She caught herself quickly, forcing her voice back into that brittle politeness. No, that won't do. That's not going to work." Daniel still hadn't spoken. His silence filled the space heavier than words ever could. He typed, then paused, then closed the laptop softly. Every movement deliberate, unhurried, controlled. It was like he had been through this dance before, like nothing she said could pierce the armor of his composure, and that terrified her. Her jaw tightened. She pressed the button again. The chime rang like a challenge now. Emily returned, her professional smile starting to stiffen. "Ma'am, what is it this time?" Patricia sat straighter, voice lower, measured like she was delivering a verdict. "I don't feel safe." The words hit the air like a blade. The businessman across the aisle shifted, muttering under his breath. A young woman 3 rows back tilted her phone upward, camera lens glinting as it began to record. A couple nearby exchanged glances, silent but sharp. The cabin had changed. It wasn't just a dispute about seats anymore. It was accusation. Emily froze for a fraction of a second. Her training told her what those words meant. "I don't feel safe" was an alarm, a phrase that carried legal weight, a phrase that forced action whether or not there was substance behind it. She straightened, her voice careful. "Ma'am, are you saying you feel threatened?" Patricia tilted her head, giving a delicate shrug, careful to never state it outright. "I'm not saying that. I just don't feel comfortable." Her phrasing was poison, strong enough to plant suspicion, soft enough to shield her from direct accountability. Daniel didn't move, didn't flinch. He just folded his hands on top of his laptop and fixed his gaze on her. Silent. Steady. Watching. And for the first time, Patricia felt a flicker of something she wasn't used to. Doubt. Silence hung heavy after her words, a silence so thick it seemed to press down on every passenger. Patricia's chest swelled with false confidence. She had played this card before in different ways, at restaurants, in boardrooms, even in subtle exchanges on the street. "I don't feel safe" was her golden key, the phrase that bent rules, summoned sympathy, and recentered the world around her comfort. But tonight, that key was jamming in the lock. Emily's posture stiffened. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her voice was firmer now. "Ma'am, I need clarity. Are you asking me to remove this passenger from his seat?" Patricia nodded once, deliberate. "Yes, move him. Put him in economy. There's space there, isn't there?" Gasps rippled through the rows. Someone scoffed audibly. The man with the Bluetooth leaned back, muttering under his breath, "Unbelievable." The woman recording with her phone adjusted her grip, angling for a better shot. Emily's jaw tightened. "Just to confirm, you are asking me to relocate a first-class passenger who paid for his seat because you don't want to sit next to him?" Patricia's smile sharpened, brittle and proud. "That's correct." Her confidence faltered when Emily's response came back cold. "That will not be happening." A ripple moved through the cabin, this time not gasps, but something sharper, applause. Faint at first, from somewhere in row 3. A couple clapped quietly, heads turned, eyes locked on Patricia. She could feel it now, the weight of being the villain in someone else's story. Her palms dampened, but she doubled down. "I am simply asking for accommodation. I don't see why my comfort is less important than his presence." Emily didn't flinch. "This is not about comfort, ma'am. This is about discrimination." The word cut sharper than Patricia expected. Discrimination. It echoed in her skull like a siren. The camera phone tilted higher, capturing the flush in her cheeks, the tremor in her jaw. Her illusion of control cracked. She opened her mouth to protest, but the sound of clapping spread wider now, passengers emboldened by Emily's stand. And through it all, Daniel sat perfectly still. His hands rested on the laptop, his eyes locked on her, not gloating, not defensive, just waiting. His silence was louder than her accusations, his patience more dangerous than her anger. She could feel it slipping away, the authority she thought she held, the sympathy she thought she commanded. The audience wasn't with her anymore. They were against her, and she was too far in to retreat. For nearly 20 minutes Daniel had been stone, a statue carved from restraint. He let her words hang in the air, let the murmurs build, let the passengers see for themselves the ugliness unfolding. But patience has its edge, and when Patricia crossed it, he decided it was time. With calm precision, he slid the laptop into his bag. No rush, no wasted motion. The cabin had fallen into a tense hush, every eye flicking between them. Then Daniel reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. Patricia's breath hitched, half expecting, half hoping for something that would justify her fear. Instead, he pulled out a badge, cool metal glinting under the overhead light. He set it on the tray table with a quiet clink. The emblem was unmistakable. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The air shifted instantly. Gasps fluttered through the rows. The businessman across the aisle sat up straighter. The young woman's camera phone zoomed in, capturing the seal that confirmed every suspicion Patricia had just weaponized against herself. Daniel's voice came at last, measured, deep, unshaken. "For the record. My name is Special Agent Daniel Stokes, FBI. I am traveling on federal business, and I will not be moved from this seat." The words landed like a gavel in a courtroom, final, irrefutable. Patricia's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her mind raced for a counterattack, but every weapon she had relied on, status, innuendo, entitlement, sounded pathetic now, crumbling under the weight of federal authority, her face drained of color. Emily exhaled slowly as though the truth had untied a knot in her chest. She turned, her tone sharpened into steel. "Ma'am, I've disrupted this cabin, falsely implied a threat, and attempted to remove a passenger based on prejudice. That is unacceptable behavior. I need you to remain in your seat, or I will have security meet you at the gate." Applause broke out again, louder this time. Someone whistled. Patricia shrank back into her seat, nails digging into her armrest. For the first time in her life, the room wasn't bending toward her discomfort. It was bending away from it, collapsing her power into nothing. And Daniel? He didn't even look at her anymore. He just placed the badge back in his jacket pocket, leaned against the headrest, and closed his eyes. Case closed. The plane descended through a quilt of clouds, engines humming with steady finality. For most passengers, the journey was nearly over. But for Patricia, the descent felt like a spiral, downward, uncontrollable, inevitable. She sat rigid, arms crossed tightly against her chest. No one spoke to her now, not the businessman across the aisle, not the couple beside her, who had earlier smiled politely, not even the flight attendants, who addressed her only in clipped professional tones. The young woman 3 rows back still had her phone angled just enough to capture her face in the frame. Patricia knew it. She could feel it. Every second was being documented, immortalized. Daniel hadn't moved since revealing his badge. He didn't gloat. He didn't even open his eyes. His composure was a wall she couldn't scale. The contrast gnawed at her, his silence more dignified than any argument she could make. When the plane touched down, the cabin erupted in the usual shuffle of seatbelts clicking and bags being yanked from overhead bins. But the atmosphere was different, charged, watchful. 2 uniformed airport security officers stood waiting just beyond the curtain, their presence a quiet thunderclap that made Patricia's stomach lurch. Emily's voice wall was calm but decisive. "Ma'am, please remain seated until the other passengers have deplaned." Her face burned as row by row people filed past her. Some avoided her eyes. Others didn't bother hiding their glares. A few whispered under their breath, sharp words like shameful, racist, pathetic. The woman with the phone made no attempt to disguise her recording now. Patricia turned her face away, but it was useless. The story was already out of her hands. Finally, Daniel rose. He adjusted his jacket, nodded once to Emily, and stepped into the aisle. As he passed Patricia, he didn't look at her, not even a glance. That absence of acknowledgement struck harder than confrontation ever could. He was beyond her, untouchable. The badge in his pocket had ended her performance, but it was the passenger's silence, the cold collective judgment, that wrote her final sentence. By the time Patricia was escorted off the plane, her power had evaporated. Tomorrow the footage would circle the globe. Headlines would reduce her name to a meme, a cautionary tale, a symbol of entitlement collapsing under its own weight. And Daniel? He would vanish into his duty, faceless again, anonymous in the endless stream of travelers. His silence would echo longer than her outrage. His patience remembered more than her anger. For Patricia, the flight was over, but the fall had just begun. By morning, Patricia's name was no longer just Patricia. It was a headline, a trending hashtag, a face frozen in mid-sneer captured from grainy phone footage and shared millions of times before she even opened her eyes. Her phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. Messages, missed calls, news alerts stacked one after another. She ignored them at first, convinced it would blow over like every other inconvenience in her life. But curiosity got the better of her. She swiped open the screen, and there it was. Her face, everywhere. First-class meltdown. Woman demands black FBI agent be removed. The clip ran on loop, her words replayed, dissected, condemned. Anchors shook their heads gravely. Calm. Mentators labeled her the embodiment of modern prejudice. Strangers wrote essays about her entitlement, her arrogance, her collapse under the weight of truth. The corporate email came next, a terse statement. Effective immediately, your contract with Langford Stone Consulting is terminated. The partners had moved fast. Her presence was no longer an asset, but a liability. The clients she once courted now wanted nothing to do with her. She paced her immaculate kitchen, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She drafted apologies, deleted them, redrafted them again. But nothing sounded right. Every sentence dripped with the same hollowness that had fueled her life for decades. And she knew. People weren't listening for apologies. They wanted her downfall. Across the country, Daniel sat in a quiet office. No press conference, no victory lap. He filed his travel report, stacked it neatly on the desk, and moved on to the next case. His name never made it to the headlines, just the title Special Agent Stokes. His face was blurred in most clips, his dignity preserved in silence. But Patricia had no such shield. For her, the story was permanent, immortal. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a symbol, and symbols don't get to hide. She stared at the screen, at the endless scroll of her own disgrace, and realized something chilling. For the first time in her life, no one was bending the rules for her comfort. No one was moving aside. The world had watched her on that plane, and the world had decided. Days blurred into each other, but the noise never stopped. Patricia's phone became both lifeline and tormentor. Every refresh of the screen brought a fresh wave of condemnation. Strangers demanded she be arrested. Former colleagues released carefully worded statements, distancing themselves from her. Even her own neighbors avoided eye contact when she stepped outside. She tried groceries, airy shopping once, just once, but the whispers followed her down every aisle. A teenager pointed a phone at her and muttered to his friend, "That's her." She abandoned her cart and fled. Sleep was no refuge. Night after night, Patricia woke in a cold sweat, the sound of clapping haunting her ears, the echo of strangers applauding her humiliation. Worse still, she saw Daniel's face in her dreams, calm, unreadable, untouchable, his silence louder than her screams. And then came the letter, a formal notice. Subject, federal inquiry. Her accusations had crossed a line, falsely implying a federal agent was a threat obstructing a flight attendant's authority. She was being investigated for interference with a flight crew, a federal offense. The words made her stomach twist. Prison, courtrooms, headlines that would stretch her downfall into years, not weeks. She sat at her dining table, papers spread before her, legal documents, printouts of articles, endless commentary dissecting her as if she were a case study in entitlement. Her lawyers spoke in clipped tones, no longer deferential but transactional. She was no longer their client of prestige. She was a liability on retainer. For the first time, Patricia felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Not anger, not indignation, but fear. A raw, suffocating fear that clawed up her throat and made her chest tighten. The life she had built on control, on bending rules, on making others yield, was crumbling, and there was no script to escape this stage. No demand she could make that would silence the world. No amount of money or charm could erase the footage burned into millions of screens. Alone in her mansion's cavernous silence, she whispered into the dark, "I just wanted my seat." But even to herself, the words sounded hollow.